we have to acknowledge it happens and start speaking about it, which seems terrifying to most people. And I guess we just have to be really frank. There are risks. It's the same as, drinking. It's the same as... everything has risks. Getting in a car with somebody, all of these things. But it's just that for some reason our bodies and sex is so shameful and so little talked about.
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman, and you're listening to the No Filter podcast, candid conversations with people who have a story to tell. Before we get started, I have a confession to make. I used to be really judgy about people who took selfies. And when I say people, I mean mostly young girls, young women, women. I used to think that it was really vain and silly and, I don't know, just superficial. But then I started thinking that if I'm serious about wanting there to be a more diverse portrayal of women's faces and bodies and lives out in the world, which I do, I've wanted that for my whole career, then what better way for that to happen than for every woman to turn the camera on herself and photograph herself? Nude selfies though, well, I stayed pretty judgy about that for a lot longer. I think it's my age. Look, it's almost certainly my age. I'm of the age where I just don't get why people, again, young girls, mostly young women, would take photos of their naked bodies and send them to people. Wasn't that just so risky and dangerous and even, I don't know, reckless? And look, I'm really not proud to admit that whenever there was a celebrity nude selfie scandal and some photos were leaked and published online, or if I heard a story about regular people sharing selfies that they'd been sent without permission and passing them around, well, of course I felt angry with the men and the boys who were sharing those photos, but I also, to be honest, felt a bit exasperated with the girls who took them. Why did they take them? I just didn't get why they'd put themselves at risk like that. Until I watched a show called The Hunting. You might have seen it when it was on SBS recently. You can catch it now on SBS On Demand for free. And whether you're old or young, a parent, a teacher, a teenage girl or boy, or just a person really, this show is a must-watch. Right now, across the country, 2 out of 3 young women between the ages of 12 and 18 have been asked to send a nude photo of themselves to someone. Just think about that. 2 out of 3. But what happens after they send it? Sophie Hyde is an Australian film director, a mother, and she's the one who created The Hunting. It's thanks to her and this show that I have completely changed my opinion and my understanding of sexting. You don't need to have seen the show to appreciate this interview, but after listening to my conversation with Sophie, I suspect that you'll see sexting very differently too. Sophie, welcome and congratulations.
Thank you.
On a masterpiece.
Wow.
In every way. I just thought that it was such an extraordinary piece of television. Tell me where The Hunting started for you.
It interestingly started in a quite unusual way, which is that someone at SBS said to me, we'd love you to think about making a show that sparks some sort of conversation. That is something that we need to talk about in Australia. So a piece of drama that we can have bigger conversations about. And I have a production company in Adelaide. There's a group of us, we work together. And we all sat around in a room going, well, what is that? What do we care about? And I was seeing a lot of material that was websites across Australia where teenagers were posting images of each other online. And I was realising that those images and the comments around them were really revolting. It wasn't just like sex stuff. It wasn't like people I'm hot for, It was really vile things about wanting photos and images of the people sitting next to them, the people in their maths class, the people around them, which is very different culture from sort of kids exploring sexuality. And as I started to dig into it, I was like, oh, we're not dealing with this at all. We're not tackling this in the world properly. And there's a really big divide. And when I started to talk to parents about it, everyone seemed terrified of this idea of technology, as though technology was the thing that was doing this. And I just kept thinking, I think this is sort of about how we treat each other and empathy. And there's a problem going on if this is the result. And how do we talk about this when we can't even talk about sex, really, at schools? We're so, we're not being frank with young people about their own experiences that are already happening. So how do we then talk about how we do those experiences better? So that, that was the first impulse, and we wanted to make a show where we really felt like we were with the characters, that we experienced this idea with them, and that we were following people that were the people whose photos were being shared, but also the people sharing the photos. And as it expanded out, we wanted to look at the teachers and the parents, and so it became a kind of ensemble drama where we really wanted to uncover the experience for all of these characters.
It's funny what you say about technology, because my friend Rebecca Sparrow, who works with teenage and tween girls, she said the parents are always talking about, the technology. But she said for them, it's just the water they swim in. Like, we never came home and said, I've got a problem with the telephone. You had a problem with life and issues, and the telephone was just how they sort of came about and how they were communicated.
Yeah, I agree. We love to lay the blame in these things. We do it sometimes with alcohol and drugs. We often do it with technology. And certainly in this case, we have a problem where older generations feel like they're so distant from the idea of how younger generations are using technology. It feels very foreign. And of course, it's moving very rapidly, and there are ways, my child is 14, and their generation has been raised to express themselves through images. So the conversation is often a series of back and forth images.
Yeah.
And those images aren't like what we think of as really beautiful ones where they're trying to look amazing. They're like all of their warts and all, that's how they express themselves. So the idea that technology is even part of that isn't registering for them. That's just normal for them. And for us, we still do this thing as well, not just of technology, but of this idea that the online world is different from the real world. And I think the more that we do that, the more that we separate these ideas of how you behave online and how you behave offline, we're getting more and more problematic. We have to talk about how we behave in general as humans towards each other across the board. And I think lots of our education still separates those things, still talks about what to do with technology. And I guess in a lot of ways we were trying to take those things out of the show. But of course they're in there. They're across the whole work, just like they're in my life, As I drove here, I'm texting 25 different people or something, We're inside of technology all the time. And we were trying very hard to work out how to show that. Yeah.
The show centres on the private exchange of images, which I'll get to in a sec, but that then escalates when there's a website like the one you described in real life, where people were uploading private images of girls that were perhaps shared consensually and privately to a public website for the purpose of shaming and objectifying them. That really happened, right? When I've got a vague memory of it, but I don't remember the details.
I think there's several cases where it happened in Australia. There's a big famous one where it was 70 schools across Australia had this go on. But actually, if you really look at it, there's quite a number of them. And not only is it these sort of websites like the one we use on the site, but Facebook groups, and there's really famous Instagram sites where people were sharing images of 11-year-old girls in the most sort of repulsive way. Yeah, it happens, and once you dig into it, you find that the material is really vile. But it highlights something that I think is super interesting, which is when we want to talk about this issue, we love to talk about the sharing of images as though the biggest problem is everyone sharing their naked images, when actually there's a big difference between consensual sharing, like you see go on in the show, and non-consensual sharing, which is the people putting it online without someone's consent. And the philosophical, emotional, moral difference of that is so big that we're actually conflating it all the time with this idea of just kids sharing their images, with each other as though they're the same thing.
You explore that so well, and I wanted to thank you for helping me understand that in a way that I think probably quite typically of my generation, I just haven't been able to understand. And I would probably say that I was guilty of expressing that sentiment. Well, if you don't take the image, it can't be sent on to someone. It can't be used against you. It can't be uploaded to this horrible site. Therefore, just don't take the image. And how were you able to understand and then express why teenagers, and particularly teenage girls, do this?
Well, I guess, I'm very frank about sexuality and very sex positive probably. So for me, teenagers exploring their sexuality in any means is something that they're going to do. They are doing. It's very clear that most teenagers are exploring this stuff.
We find that very threatening as a culture, don't we? This idea that teenagers are sexual beings.
And then, they are sexual beings. We were sexual beings. And then technology is sort of used in a very safe way in a lot of ways for young people. So a lot of girls have spoken about how they're not actually ready to touch someone else, but they're ready to explore sexuality. And so it's not like just getting drunk and shagging at a party. Do you know, like it's something that feels like they're more in control of it and that it does feel safer to them. And I think that's really interesting. I think the thing that shifted for me was the realisation that it was like abstinence training used to be. People used to train about sex education by just saying don't have sex. It doesn't work. It's never worked. And people are doing the same thing with sex and technology. They're saying don't share photos. And again, you're suggesting, one, that the problem of, that you're basically victim blaming when something goes wrong. And two, you're suggesting, that you should not do something that people are just not listening to. The way that it's taught in schools, of this, it's illegal, don't do it. People are just not listening to that. And I guess we just wanted to find a way. There's some amazing people training now in this and trying to speak to young people with a more open voice,
It's like a harm minimisation approach, isn't it? It's if you're going to take a photo and send it to someone, don't have your face in it.
Yeah, don't have your face in it is a big one now. It's been an interesting gender divide thing too, where boys typically aren't blamed anyway if a photo is released of them the way that a girl would be. But girls mostly have traditionally put their faces in the photos. It's kind of just a way we culturally respond to things.
Well, it also feels in a way less objectifying, doesn't it? It's like I'm not just a set of boobs or genitals. I'm a person. I want you to see me.
Yeah, because I guess, whether that's a sort of inherent thing or just how we're raised, that's part of the way we get off as women. That's part of what we do.
Yeah.
And as men, there is a tradition of dick pics.
Not
That's
a lot
what
of
men
faces
say.
in dick pics.
There ain't no faces. Yeah.
Hence the name. There's no such thing as vag pics.
Yeah, well, box shots.
Oh, box shots.
That has become a thing, but I think that's from that movement exactly. I think box shots are pictures of the vulva.
So you were talking earlier about the way that we treat each other, and technology is really just another manifestation of this interaction between humans. What the hunting is so based on, and that type of behaviour of sharing photos without consent and uploading them to sites, is an objectification of women. And that's endemic in our culture, isn't it? And also that predatory sense, hence the name, the hunting, which I didn't understand until about episode 2 or 3. How do we make sense of that?
Yeah, the hunting became a really interesting name, it became something important to us because it wasn't just about exploration. It was about specifically going after images of particular people, which is something to do with power, It's about having power over somebody else. Sharing an image without their consent is about power. It's not really about sex. It's not even about the nudity. You see the storyline in the hunting that's about an image shared that isn't naked, but it's somebody engaged in an explicit act, and that it's minimised a lot. But actually the boys seeing that image, they know the value of that image, and it's power over someone.
To humiliate, to embarrass.
It's terrifying,
to
actually.
To
disempower. So for us, we needed to explore just the predatory behaviour around that. What's problematic about it, it is very gendered. Our responses to it are gendered. We continue to perpetuate the same problems. And yeah, it is about objectification of women and having power over them, wanting to humiliate them, believing in a lot of ways that they are simply there for male gratification. And so to me, that's a problem of how we're raising our boys and of the ideals of masculinity, which I think are incredibly unsatisfying for women, of course, and the way that they're being treated, but also for men who we're seeing experiencing high levels of suicidal thoughts, problems with alcohol, problems with violence at a huge level, even problems, in terms of the number of car accidents is correlated to people who have high levels of expectation of masculinity in their lives. This is a troubling thing. At the same time, we try very hard not to speak about it in a two-gendered way because we really do believe that we need to start looking at each other as humans and stop thinking about each other as separate genders. But when you are exploring it, the heart of it is insanely gendered, and certainly the response to it, the way people are treated after the event, is very gendered.
And what you say about power is so true, because it's so important to make the distinction between a website where there are pictures of young girls. That's a sexual perversion, whereas with this is more about power and humiliation and dominance and ownership of individuals, and that's what sharing without consent, that's what that's about too. It's about boys getting status with other boys by trading these images of girls to increase their status within their male tribe.
That's right. It does increase their status. I suspect they get off on it as well, but that's not necessarily just a sexual gratification. That's also about power and a feeling of ownership or being entitled to that body. I think there is a problem where a lot of young men do think women are there for them and they are supposed to look good, and that they're, even in terms of sex, you have conversations with young men who suddenly realise that women might actually take pleasure in sex, and they're like, until now, I've always just thought I was supposed to try and get sex from somebody. I was supposed to convince her to have sex, and we just keep perpetuating that mythology in our storytelling and everything, that a woman should resist and that a man should go after. Now, these are the same problems that we see play out in the hunting, I think.
In your research, did you come across the effect that porn's had in the way that particularly boys whose first exposure to sex will be through porn, which is a very extreme form of sex, almost always through the male gaze and through the male point of view, and what is going to turn a guy on, not what's pleasurable for a woman. In the research that you did, and I wanted to ask you what research you did do, did that factor into it?
We certainly looked at it a bunch, looked at a lot of studies about pornography, and one of the things that was really apparent was, that boys and girls, young people in general, are seeing porn as one of their first images of sex, and certainly coming to understand sex as a visual thing. So how sex looks is very important rather than how it feels, or being able to explore how something feels before you've seen it is very unusual now,
Because that's how we experience sex, as a feeling before we saw it.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what that would be the other way around, particularly with when girls are so worried about how they're perceived and they want to almost perform how they think they should be.
Exactly. I mean, I think if sex starts out as a performance, we're in trouble. But also, not only have young men found this as their first sexual gratification through the viewing of porn, but so have young women. And so young women start to feel like that is how they experience pleasure as well. And perhaps they are experiencing it, but whether that's an expansive experience of pleasure or a limited one, I would argue it's a limited one. And I think porn, fine, some people are really against it, and I think it exists, it's going to be watched. Again, I would be like, please watch it with a critical eye, that isn't how something feels, or that doesn't have to be how it is. And that idea of viewing anything with a critical eye is super important. But, we're sitting here talking about porn, but they're not talking about it in schools. And until we can recognise that, I mean, all these teenagers, they're talking about it in schools, but they're not speaking about it with anyone formally. And so it's really hard to dissect the experience. How do you dissect it if no one will even bring it up?
There are a couple of scenes that I can mention without giving anything away that happen in the school. And one is the headmistress talking to the school, and it's a co-ed school. Both the schools depicted in The Hunting are co-ed schools. And she starts talking about uniforms and girls don't wear black bras, pull your uniforms down, they need to be closer to the knee, and then segues in a way that she feels is seamlessly to talking about uploading other people's photos and sexting. And then there's another scene where the male teacher is talking to the class about it and he sends the boys away and tells the girls to stop taking photos. And those two things made me really think about the way sex is discussed in schools, full stop, which is very much fear-based, shame-based. You don't want to get pregnant, you don't want to get an STD, you don't want to get raped, you don't want to be humiliated by someone. There's no discussion of pleasure. And the way it's discussed with girls versus boys is also very different, isn't it?
Truly it is. And those scenes, some people would read those scenes and think, oh, come on, like surely we don't do this anymore. We definitely do. We 100%, there is rules around girls' uniforms that exist to protect boys from being too sexually aroused, essentially, or from seeing the girls as sexual objects. But it's, again, doing the same thing, where it's like saying if you're showing your body, you're a sexual object, rather than you might be cooler or like or whatever it is. You know, these are very, very problematic things.
And also the implication that, what do you expect?
Yeah.
What do you expect? If you're wearing a short skirt and someone takes a photo up your skirt while you're walking up the stairs to the cafeteria, well, what do you expect?
Imagine what we're saying to our girls about that, like how shameful we're making their bodies, for instance. But also imagine what we're saying to our boys, that they can't control that they don't have any power over those urges, that that's a normal thing to do. I mean, it's crazy. But, you know, the male teacher talking to the girls, I mean, it's really interesting because when you get inside the head of a character and you start seeing it from their point of view, you really know why someone goes there.
100%. And I found myself saying those things either in my head, you know, or out loud. Like, why do these girls do it? Or why do these celebrities take these nude pictures of, you know, it's so dangerous.
Yeah,
They need to stop and then we won't have a problem.
Yeah, which is sort of like the why did they get so drunk conversation. And when someone gets king hit on the street, we don't say why were they out drinking late at night.
But then,
you know,
so how do you factor risk into that? When you're talking to people about, like, if you send a photo to someone and they upload it, it's not your fault, but how do you minimise the risk in that interaction without sounding like you're slut-shaming someone?
Yeah, I think it's really tricky. I mean, I think one thing I would say is most people that engage in the sharing of explicit images don't share it. Most people don't share. And that's because most people think of it as a private act and have respect for the person that they're, you know, with. And you would hope that that's the case more and more. And you would hope that the more we speak about it as something that's morally and legally wrong, you know, to non-consensually share something, the less it will even happen. I don't know how to risk minimise. Yeah, I don't walk around at night. Am I upset about that? Yes, I'd love to. Do I decide not to do it, you know, because of the fear? Yeah. I mean, it's really tricky. I would like to say to my child, don't worry about that. But I also want them to stay alive, you know, and not have their photo all over the internet. I think the answer is that we need to discuss it more and more on the other side. You know, there's lots of material, like what do you do if your image gets shared? You know, what do you do if somebody has shared an image of, you know, your friend? What do you do when you get sent an image? What's your responsibility to the person that you're engaging with?
When my son was a teenager, I remember saying to him, if a girl ever sends you a photo of her boobs, delete it immediately, because I was worried about the risks inherent in him having that on his phone. Because the legal system is not caught up with technology, what comes a shock to many people is to realise that if you take a photo, if you're a girl who's underage and you take a photo of your own body and you send it to your partner in a consensual way and he asked for it, you've both just committed so many crimes by taking the photo, sending it to each other. Even if you've taken a photo of your own body, you're making child pornography. And then when you send it to your boyfriend, you are distributing child pornography and he's then in the possession of child pornography. I don't know if the laws have been changed to sort of catch up with things.
They have a little bit.
But how do you explain consequences to kids who we know the parts of their brain that comprehend consequences don't fully develop until into their 20s?
Yeah. I mean, we have to talk about it. I mean, the most fundamental thing is like we have to acknowledge it happens and start speaking about it, which seems terrifying to most people. And I guess we just have to be really frank. There are risks. It's the same as, drinking. It's the same as everything has risks. Getting in a car with somebody, all of these things. But it's just that for some reason our bodies and sex is so shameful and so little talked about that it's very hard for us to work out, how to talk about the examples of when it goes well and when it goes badly. A lot of people use this really beautiful campsite idea now, which is about every interaction you have that's a sexual interaction, you should leave that other person better than you found them, which I think is gorgeous.
That's beautiful.
Imagine if I was thinking if I was raised and being explicitly told that, my interaction with people is so different rather than the fear-based thing of do they like me enough, what are they, all these other things that crop up. But if I'm literally thinking about the other person, how they're responding, whether I make them feel better, even if I want something fleeting, well, how beautiful and what an interesting dynamic that becomes.
What about the roles of parents who are trying to navigate this in a world that they don't understand, that is so different to the way we were raised? The way you portrayed it was so interesting it's not just what I say but what I do and how our children perceive us to be behaving.
The parents are really interesting to watch in a show like The Hunting, and we are reflected in our children all the time, and the kind of way that we display love and affection is represented, and I think we look at that. All I would really say is trying to understand the technology is probably not the answer. We're never going to keep up with, what social media app is happening. It really is about talking about trust and respect and consent. Really, consent is a big thing. The idea of enthusiastic consent in any situation is something to robustly speak about with all children, I think, as parents. And for me, that's just, it's about being open and not, shaming a child, of course, when something's going wrong. But that can be not just for somebody whose image is leaked into the world or who's done something like that, but also listening to somebody who may have done the wrong thing and shared an image or treated someone badly. How do we start to speak about that in a way that's not just horrifying, but is this is wrong, let's talk about it. The divide is very strong, and our experience is that parents, are really frightened of speaking about it.
And also just confused. The four sets of parents in The Hunting all have such different reactions and manifest in different ways, but what they all share is just but why? Why would you do, they just don't get it. Which I found that The Hunting helped me get it in a way that I never have. Despite having raised one child beyond his teenage years and two more on the way. The differences between the effects on girls and boys are also very different, aren't they? So with young girls, you want to say, you don't want this to happen to you, but if it does, it's not the worst thing in the world. But don't let it happen to you.
It was really important to us, that thing of it's not the worst thing in the world, because I think the way the messaging goes out is your life will be ruined.
Yes.
And your life will be ruined goes out as if your image gets out online, your life will be ruined. I'd love to see messaging that was if you share an image of someone without their consent, your life will be ruined. Because really, truly, that's a sex offence. That is a serious offence when it's without consent like that. It's not even a grey area morally. It's, to me, I don't want to get panicky about that either, but I'd like to see wording shift a little bit in that direction because truthfully, for the girls, with the two young actors that, we worked with, we talked a lot about, okay, if their naked image gets out or an image of them doing something explicit, we can say that's the end, or we can say okay, someone's seen you naked. Life goes on. It's not that bad. This idea that our bodies are the most shameful thing in the world is crazy, Yeah. We've got to get over this now. It's celebrities starting to share their own images, just being someone blackmailed me, I'm uploading it myself. Well, great. No one's going to do anything then, we've all got these bodies. They're not really shameful, but we keep making them more and more shameful and saying because what? You're corrupted, you're not desirable. If someone's seen you, you're no longer innocent. I'm not sure. But certainly if you have done a sex offence against another young person, then there should be some trouble. Yeah.
You mentioned about how the girls, you do a lot with the selfies and the girls and their eyes. To me, that was such a beautifully told through line through the series about how taking selfies are about girls forming their own identities to themselves more than wanting the approval of boys.
You know, it's literally the first time in history that women have had control over their own image.
Yes.
And we then make it a problem. We then say that girls are being vain and oversharing and sexualizing themselves and all of these things. Well, that's been done to us throughout history. We've been shown as an image, forever. But for the first time, girls are holding their own camera and doing that. I mean, there's a real power in that. There's a real self-assurance, or there's an exploration of who they are, as you say, identity. But there's also a challenge in it. I think selfies have a remarkable challenge. And one of the things we realised as we started to look at the material was those beautiful, strong, powerful, very comfortable images of girls showing themselves sexually, revealing themselves, were exactly the thing that was being turned on them when people uploaded their images. And they were rejecting that and pushing back to those girls that they didn't want them to have that power. Now, I think there's something huge going on there, and I think it's terrifying, But I feel like we are also to blame, all of us, for dismissing the selfie so much, for making it because we believe that taking our own image is somehow about making ourselves look beautiful or cool or something. And I think for young people, it's much more than that. It's showing how they feel in any one moment, in a myriad of ways. Yeah.
And literally putting themselves in the picture, putting themselves in the world in a way that they want to in that moment.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
The Hunting is a masterpiece. Have you watched it with your 14-year-old? How do they feel about?
Well, Audrey, my 14-year-old, has done a lot of work with us before and was at the read, helped us read it, but has only weirdly watched episode 2 with me. I'm not sure why.
Episode 1 is the first scene or 2 in episode 1 is enough to make a teenager run away from their parents in the room. But once you get past that...
It's interesting, actually. Some of the people that we were working with would try and watch it with their kids, and their kids all wanted to watch it on their own.
Yes,
which is great.
That's exactly right.
It's made for adults in a lot of ways. We don't make the show targeted at young people.
Yeah,
but I feel like it is an experience that young people are going to want to watch and engage with.
I agree with you. I would recommend that people watch it separately to their teenagers and not force them to watch it sitting next to them, but then they talk about it.
Yeah, you've got to be able to talk about it after a show like this.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I was trying to get my daughter to watch it, she was like, oh, it's just everything that we get told at school, isn't it? It's just everything we get told at school. She felt that it was going to be a bit lectury, but I'm like, no, you don't understand. I think if anything, it's more of an education for parents. I think kids know a lot of this stuff. For parents, I just found it, and adults and anyone with a young person in their life or who just doesn't understand why anyone would take a photo and share it. There's so much value in this show, and, you've done such an incredible creative but also community service in making it. So thank you so much and congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to No Filter. Now go out and take a nude selfie. No, don't do that. Well, maybe do. It's actually none of my business what you choose to do. But I really loved the way Sophie made me see how instead of the recklessness that I thought teenagers and young girls and women took nude selfies, it's actually a feeling of safety and security compared to actual physical contact. I'd never thought about it in those terms. And I just thought it was so interesting and so eye-opening. What I love about this show the most is when my mind is opened and my opinion changed about something I thought I believed. And I would encourage you to go and watch The Hunting on SBS On Demand now. It's full of amazing acting performances. It's really, really great. It's 4 episodes. And you can follow the link in our show notes. And if you'd like something else to listen to, can I suggest you check out my interview with the very talented and delightful Richard Roxburgh, who stars in the show, but he's also one of Australia's best-known actors. He was in Rake. He plays an awful character in The Hunting. And when he came and sat down in the podcast studio for our interview, I looked at him and said, I've just finished watching the show and I really don't like you right now. And he was very good-natured about it. And by the end of the interview, I liked him very, very much indeed. Anyway, we'll pop a link in the show notes to that interview as well. No Filter is produced by Liza Ratliff. I'm Mia Friedman, and you can sign up for my newsletter at miafriedman.com.au. Otherwise, I'll see you on Mamma Mia.